Welcome to Stuff We Play, home of everything weird and retro. So Nintendo is a company known for doing things that set them apart from other hardware makers. From Wiimotes to Wii U to Virtual Boy to 3DS, for better or worse, you can always expect a Nintendo system to have something unique about it. Rarely ever does a Nintendo console come off as just another piece of gaming hardware. I think a good example of this is the Game Boy Color. Now I know you might be reaching to hit that dislike button right now, but hear me out on this. The Game Boy Color appears to merely be a stopgap system. It was released in 1998 in a similar form factor to the Game Boy Pocket, which in itself was just a redesign of the original Game Boy from 1989. You see, the hardware powering the original black and white Game Boy was over 9 years old at this point, and there's a new 32-bit advanced Game Boy in the works. But that wasn't quite ready yet. And yes, that's the same advanced Game Boy that would later be released as a Game Boy Advance in 2001. The Game Boy Color is a bit of an odd duck. A lot of its games could be played in black and white on an original Game Boy, and all original Game Boy games could be played on it. Most of the cartridges looked mostly the same as original Game Boy carts as well, with the only differences being the color of them. It also lacked a backlit or frontlit screen, despite the brightly lit Game Boy Light being released in Japan the same year. Hell, Nintendo made a point of often combining sales numbers for the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color in some reports. In many ways, the Game Boy Color appears to be just that. It's a Game Boy that can play games in color. But it really is a bit more than that. Its processor is twice as fast as its predecessor, and it even contains 3 times as much memory. Oh, and it contains this little sensor on the top of it. This is the Game Boy Color Infrared Sensor. In theory, this should have revolutionized gaming, allowing for wireless communications and wireless Pokémon trading and other such things that could be done between Game Boys, and making the old link cable obsolete. In reality though, it ended up coexisting with the link cable, and it was only ever taken advantage of by 28 games. That's 28 out of 915 official titles, I should mention. Though, I guess technically that's 29 games, but we'll get to that. Clearly Nintendo thought it could have had some staying power, as they used this same technology on a couple of other consoles as well. This finally raises the question, what's the deal with the Game Boy Color IR sensor? Well, to start off, what is infrared? Well, infrared radiation, also referred to as just IR, is a type of energy that we can't see, but that, in large enough amounts, we can feel as heat. The sun, for example, is a very noticeable source of infrared energy. Infrared transmitters and receivers, like the ones built into the Game Boy Color, work by emitting pulses of this infrared energy that correspond to certain binary codes. It's very old school and not a super powerful way to send info, at least with how it's used in most consumer settings anyways. The most notable example of this is in your average everyday TV remote. And actually, on the topic of TV remotes, the first game I want to talk about today is a little Pokémon clone called Robopon. And when I say Pokémon clone, I mean it. My goodness, is this blatant. Anyways, I want to cover all 29 IR-capable Game Boy Color games, and Robopon is definitely the oddest of them. It's more of a footnote here than anything else I'd love to cover in its own right someday since it is such a blatant Pokémon clone. But, you see this funky looking cartridge here? Well, it's special because it has an IR receiver built into it. Yeah, this one is that technicality I mentioned earlier since it doesn't use the IR sensor on the Game Boy Color itself. They probably built a receiver into the cartridge itself instead of using the GBC sensor, just to maintain compatibility with original Game Boy models. Anyways, in some dungeons in Robopon, you literally have to point a TV remote or a similar type of IR remote at your cartridge and press buttons on it in order to get past certain obstacles. It's really odd and feels more like an afterthought than anything else, but then again, I guess that could kind of be said of most games that use IR on the Game Boy Color. The year after Robopon came out, Pokémon Gold and Silver versions were released. These, along with the later Pokémon Crystal version, all supported the IR sensor in the exact same way. I mean literally the exact same way, because they're all basically the same game but with some minor different Pokémon locations and stuff, because, again, it's Pokémon. You'd think the IR sensor would allow for wireless Pokémon trading, but that is not the case here. Such a thing wouldn't be possible until the Game Boy Advance wireless adapter that was released and shipped with copies of Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green 5 years later. Instead, IR is just using these games for Mystery Gift, and even then, it's a much less feature-rich version of Mystery Gift than in later games. You can't get Pokemon from Nintendo events or anything through this here. Instead, you can just use it to do a random item exchange with other players. This is actually pretty cool because you can not only use Mystery Gift with other folks who have a Game Boy Color and a Gen 2 Pokemon game, but also with Pokemon Stadium 2 on the N64 and the Pokemon Pikachu 2 dedicated handheld console. I still can't help but feel like there's a bunch of missed potential here though. All you can do besides Mystery Gift here is populate the trainer house in Viridian City with a trainer who has a friend's party, which, I guess is almost like being able to wirelessly battle, but not really. I have a feeling that wireless Pokemon trading could have at least been somewhat possible in this generation. Dang, Pokemon Crystal version even had some rudimentary online features in Japan. It also doesn't help that you have to unlock Mystery Gift by speaking to some random girl in Goldenrod City, something I think that most players would have missed back in the day. Oh, and despite coming out around the same time as Pokemon Crystal and also having an IR sensor built into it, the Gen 2 Pokemon games can't communicate at all with the Pokemon Mini system. As kind of a weird side note, the Nintendo DS remakes of Pokemon Gold and Silver, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, had IR sensors built into their cartridges. This was so they could send Pokemon items to and from the Pokewalker, which was basically just a fancy pedometer that let you level up your Pokemon while walking around in real life. Seriously, I love that thing. Speaking of games that were released in bundles of 2, let's talk about Bomberman MAX. Released only a month after Pokemon Gold and Silver versions, Bomberman MAX Red Champion and Blue Champion both serve as solid portable entries in the long-running, explosively arcadey Bomberman series, and also tried to take advantage of the Pokemon hype wave that was started a few years earlier by Pokemon Red and Blue versions. Like Pokemon, these two games are more or less the exact same. But they also feature these little creatures called Cheruboms, which you can battle and fuse with other Bomberman MAX players via IR. And that's cool and all, but it also helps show how half-baked the IR support in Pokemon Gen 2 was. Cooler than that though, is the secret level feature. You can literally point a TV remote at your Game Boy Color to unlock secret levels in Bomberman MAX, and that's honestly one of the coolest yet weirdest things I've heard in a while. And speaking of weird, here's a Japanese exclusive title called Chee Alien. The title literally translates to Chalien, and it too has a really weird looking cartridge. The game outright requires the IR sensor, to a point where it outright will not work on a Game Boy Advance, being one of the only Game Boy Color games that won't work on it. That's not the only odd feature in this title though. It has both built-in Rumble support and Game Boy printer support too. It also came with an add-on for the GBC called the Spectrum Communicator, which was supposed to enhance the IR sensor's sensitivity. In this odd title, you move your GBC around in real life to search for creatures called Chaliens. These are found by scanning artificial light sources with your handheld. And that's basically it. Think of it as a glorified tech demo. A neat one, sure, but a tech demo all the same. Though there's not a ton to do in this one, I find it surprising that it never made its way out of Japan. After all, it was made by Creatures Inc., a company best known for their heavy involvement in the Pokemon series. Perhaps weirdest of all with this one, though it wouldn't get any sequels, it would get a spin-off on the GBA called No 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 Puzzle Chalien. And then one of the mini-games from that game would later get a spin-off of its own via DSi Weird called Spin 6. And of these three games, that was the one that got a North American release. No, not the super cool GBC tech demo, but instead the one that was a spin-off of a spin-off. The sensor-based strangeness doesn't end there though. The 2001 Game Boy Color version of Donkey Kong Country added in Game Boy printer support, and with that also came the ability to trade your printable pictures with other folks who own DKC for GBC. The Mission Impossible GBC game had an IR feature in the in-game personal organizer that could interact with certain real-world items. I'm sure I would find this really cool if the Mission Impossible game itself wasn't hot garbage. Mickey's Speedway USA, which was developed by Rare, can transfer data from Rare's previous Mickey Mouse-themed GBC racer, Mickey's Racing Adventure. This is of note because the IR side of things is apparently completely handled by Mickey's Speedway USA, which is neat. One of the best things about doing videos like this is being able to give games a try that I would have likely never given a shot otherwise. Case in point, The Road to El Dorado on Game Boy Color. And I gotta say, this Ubisoft platformer is actually pretty solid. I'm not just saying that because I love the movie it's based off of either. It's just legit a really fun little game. The IR sensor comes into play here thanks to a feature called Ubi Key. This allows you to communicate with other supported Ubisoft Game Boy Color games, not just Road to El Dorado carts, to unlock stuff like extra stages and minigames. By the by, the other Ubi Key games for GBC are Hype the Time Quest, Flipper and Lopaka, Papyrus, which despite the name predates Undertale by 15 years, Tonic Trouble, Toonsylvania, the Animorphs game, Inspector Gadget Operation Mad Cactus, Carl Lewis's Athletics 2000, Spyro the Robot Invasion, VIP, and even the Game Boy Color version of Rayman. Side note, that Rayman port is really solid. Not as good as the PS1 version of course, but it's definitely more than serviceable. Anyway, Ubi Key basically does the same thing in all of these, but I think it's a pretty cool idea nonetheless. Also, is it just me or is it kind of weird how Ubisoft supported the IR sensor in more titles than Nintendo themselves did? And even if Ubi Key did the same thing across most of these titles, it's still more than what Nintendo often did in their own games. I mean, just look at Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. Don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic version of the original SMB. It's filled with extras, and even with the screen crunch, none of the platforming challenges ever feel cheap to me. Even if there are debatably better ways to play the original game today, I still find myself coming back to this one on occasion. That said, the fact that all you can use the IR sensor for here is exchanging high scores is kind of lame. The same goes for Pokémon Pinball as well, though. In that case, I'm not really sure what else they would use it for. Like, at least in Mario Bros. Deluxe, maybe they could let you unlock a mini game or something. On an odd note, the final game ever released for the GBC in North America also featured IR sensor support. This was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which was an Electronic Arts developed RPG based off the book of the same name. Again, you can use the IR sensor here for a form of wireless trading, this time wirelessly exchanging cards that feature famous witches and wizards. I'm sure I'd find this cool if this title wasn't more dreadful than J.K. Rowling's Moral Compass. Warlocked is an RTS of all things, and for an RTS in the Game Boy Color, it actually works surprisingly well. It also has a feature where you can build up different wizards and then trade them across Game Boys over IR. Anyways, can someone please explain why we couldn't wirelessly trade Pokemon again? This finally brings me to my two favorite games we're talking about today. These are Pokemon Trading Card Game and its Japanese exclusive sequel, Pokemon Card GB2. I adore these games so much. I know you can exploit most of the AI if you dive into more serious deck building. The original game holds a special place in my heart, and thanks to a fan translation, I can easily say it's a damn shame that we never got its sequel over here. I'd really love to dive into these two games in a video of their own someday, because I really can't stress enough how fantastic they are. Who knew that the video games based off the trading card game that was based off some other video games could be so fun? Anyways, in order to complete your in-game card collection, you need to find another player and engage in Card Pop. Basically, through Card Pop, you and your fellow Pokemon Master in Training get given a random card. There are some cards that can only be exclusively obtained through Card Pop. These cards change between the two titles, of course, to reflect the sets available, because, of course, the vast majority of cards in these games are based off of real-world Pokemon cards that were available pre-2001. It's a really cool little feature, and if and when I do that video on these games, I should get another GBC on hand just so I can show this off. Yeah, it's really not much, but dang it, I love these games, let me have this. But with that, that's every single game that supports the Game Boy Color IR sensor. Well, that I know of at least. It's really hard to find info on this underused feature, with all the lists I found online being incomplete. I know this always goes for videos like these, but especially so here. If this list is incomplete, let me know in the comments below and I'll try my best to mark any additions to this list in the description. On the topic of incomplete lists, partway through making this video, I found out about yet another game that supports the IR sensor. Though it's a game that I wouldn't even really call, well, a game. I know, how horrible of me to have forgotten to mention, get this, Mary-Kate and Ashley's Pocket Planner. I swear that's Game of the Year material right there. But on that note, what weird and retro piece of gaming history should I look at in the future? Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Stuff We Play for more great content like this. I'd also like to thank our Patreon patrons and YouTube channel members, as their support means the world, especially in these odd times. So with that, Thank you very much for watching. Stay classy, and I'll see you next time.